Thank you for joining us. We're here to talk about a new release of MetroAE. This is a major release for us. It has some pretty big changes, although we've striven very hard to make sure that it's all backwards compatible with what you're familiar with. But I think you'll really like some of the enhancements we've made. It makes Metro a little easier to use, and we're pretty happy with the contents as they are today. One thing that I wanted to let you all know is that as you want to upgrade, let's say you're using version 3.4.1, which is the previous version, to 4.0. If you're using the GitHub clone, the way that you upgrade is very simple. You just cd into the Nuage Metro directory where the clone exists, and you do a git pull. Now, before you do that, if you're currently using the default deployment, you might want to make copies of your files that are there, maybe make another copy. If you have created additional deployments, they will be untouched, and so that'll be great. If you're using the container, you need to grab the new copy of the MetroAE script from the repo. There's no longer one of the things we'll talk about today is no longer an RPM. So you probably need to, not probably, you should uninstall the RPM, grab the new version of the Metro script, and run MetroAE container update, and that will update your container to the version 4. So let's go ahead. So today's agenda, we're going to go through a little bit of an introduction. Perhaps most of you are familiar with MetroAE, but some are not, so we'll go through a little introduction there. We'll talk about the general features that were added, some specific component features for VSD, VSC, and other components. And then we'll have information about how to contact us, and of course we'll see if there are any questions for us. In terms of an introduction, I mean, people sometimes ask us, what is MetroAE and what's it for? Well, what we've done is we've created a platform whose purpose is to do automation on the installation and upgrade of Nuage Networks components. So if you want to deploy something brand new, you want to upgrade something you already have, you can use Metro to do that. And one question that often comes up is people want to know if I installed manually, do I need to, am I prevented from using MetroAE for my upgrade? Well, the answer is no. You don't have to use Metro to do your initial installation or upgrades. You can use Metro at any time on any existing deployment that you have. And Mike will be talking a little bit later about kind of a new feature that we've introduced in version 4 that will really help with that. When you want to use Metro, you can consume it in one of two ways. You can either download a Docker container and run that way, or use a clone of the GitHub repo. Either one works. They work the same way, use the same set of commands. And in both cases, you provide input to Metro either via command line wizard, which will produce deployment files for you, a spreadsheet saved as a CSV file, which we also will produce deployment files for you, and then you can edit the deployment YAML files directly yourself if that's what you'd like. And I've been talking about deployments. Well, deployments are simply directories, and each directory corresponds to one of the things you want to either install or upgrade. So a deployment could be a data center, it could be a VNS, you could have 2 or 3 VNS configurations, however you'd like, and they're each independent of one another. And we built the platform because we believe that automation is faster and more reliable than doing things manually. It's just far too easy to make a mistake when typing on the command line. So one of the things that we've built in is checks for prerequisites before we run to make sure that everything's working correctly or has the best possible chance of succeeding. And then after we're done, we run health checks to make sure that everything ended up the way we expected to. We've designed it so that you don't need to write code. You just need to provide the inputs, and then we take care of all the rest. And I like to talk about it as it's organized or designed in hierarchical commands. So if you're familiar with the way Ansible works, which is what it is under the covers, you can have high-level playbooks that do everything, like install everything, And then you can have low-level playbooks that actually will take you step by step through an install or step by step through an upgrade. And then our promise to you is that we update and test for every Nuage release as it comes out. So you don't have to update your scripts or anything else. We take care of that for you. And I'm not going to go through this slide in detail, but just to give you an idea of the kind of testing we do to guarantee that it works. We do a number of installation tests every day. Some of them run weekly. We also do upgrade tests, and we do automated tests on the wizard that we've produced. So we have the command line wizard that you can use to simplify the gathering of the data. And it's pretty popular. We have, we're approaching 600 registered users at the moment. And in that group of users, we have customers and partners, and folks on the Nokia and Nuage side of things. So there's quite a few people who registered to use it, and it's getting a lot of traction. Excuse me. And in order to register and to get access to Metro, you have to log into that website that's shown there, devops.nuagenetworks.net. Scroll down, there's a request access button. You'll fill in a form, and we'll add you to the repo. Now we'd like to transition into the new features portion of our presentation.
Hi everyone. Today I would like to introduce a new MetroAE command line. There are a lot of new features with the enhanced MetroAE command line. It includes menus, improved help, the type completion support, backward compatible with the previous version, no longer need RPM for container installation and self-updating. So let's do the demo. Okay. First off, when you just clone the Git repo to your local machine, just like this, you have two options. The first option is to run in the repo. The second option is to run with the container. We will show the first option first. When we get into the repo, just like this, the first thing that we would like to do is to set up the type completion, which is source. So that we can use the type to autocomplete the command line. Now let's see the new command line. When you type the help, which is -H, or if the command line cannot match with any command line available, the new command line will print out a friendly help menu. As we can see here, we can have all of the available command line here. We also have a submenu. For example, we have a container submenu. If we type MetroAE container, it will print out the help for the container. We can also use the -H to force command line to print out the help menu. For example, if we type MetroAE install -H, or we can it will print out all the commands for the install, or we can type MetroAE install VSD -H. It will print out all command line for installed VSD. We can also directly run this command. For example, we can do like MetroAE install VSD pre-deploy. Actually, it will run this playbook. This is only for the demo. I will not run this. The command line is also backward compatible with the old command line. We can do something like MetroAE VSD pre-deploy. It's just like the previous command. It will run the same playbook as the previous command. today the Metro is so easy to use. If we run via the container, it doesn't require RPM anymore. If we have installed the Docker, we can easily install it via the container because we will only have one script. If we run it inside the repo, it will it will run in the repo mode by default. If we want to run with the container, the only thing that we need to do is to copy the command line out of the repo. For example, we can copy to local bin, copy MetroAE into USR into local bins, and if we just go outside, and we can use the so we can run the Metro from anywhere. Right now, because we have never set up the MetroAE container, we can only use the container menus. The first thing that we want to do is to pull the latest MetroAE image, which is MetroAE container pull. So it will pull the latest menu. It will take some few minutes. We will not run this to save some time. Then we should do the should do the setup. To run the container, we need to assign a location of the to store the temporary MetroAE data folder. MetroAE container setup. We assign it to temp. So at this time, the container will replace the current running MetroAE command line with the new version of the container. We can also give access to all available command lines, like we did in the Git repo. Like we can do MetroAE install VSDs, pre-deploy. It will run inside the container. Actually, I will not run this. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Joe. So this is Mike. I'll be taking over. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about some other features that we have in Metro. So in Metro version 4, there's an existing wizard with Metro that was released in a previous version of Metro. And the wizard allows you to have a step-by-step guide, walkthrough of installing Metro and creating your first deployment. However, we have enhanced the wizard, and we have added a step so that the wizard can now discover components that are already running in your system. So we're calling this discovery. And the discovery step was added to the wizard that already exists. And how it works is the user provides their hypervisor info, and the wizard can then log into the hypervisor and determine the information about your currently running VMs, your nuage components. So this includes things like the virtual machine name, IP addresses, the interfaces, bridges, etc. The discovery supports both KVM and vCenter hypervisors. And with the vCenter hypervisor, it can discover the vCenter data center, cluster, and data store values, along with addresses and interfaces, etc. This should be very, very useful for upgrades. So if you have an existing deployment that was, even if it was installed outside of Metro and you're coming in clean without any deployment files, this should be a way that you can just very quickly get started with your first set of deployment files for that system. Okay, so I have a demo as well. So this is just a simple standalone deployment with just some core components for demo. You can see that I have a VSD VStat, which is Elasticsearch, and a VSC running on on my system. So I'm just going to run MetroAE Wizard. Okay, so this is the wizard. For those who haven't seen it before, we have videos online in our YouTube to demonstrate the wizard in general. However, you'll see that there is a auto discover existing components step that's now appeared in version 4.0. I'm going to skip a lot of these steps for time purposes. We don't need to verify the installation. We don't need to unzip. I am going to create a new deployment. I'm going to call it Wizard. Okay, so we're at the auto discover components. So let's continue. Would I like to discover existing components automatically? Yes, I would. It's asking for my hypervisor address. Note that I am using the same literal machine to host my VMs as I'm using to do the Ansible deployment. This isn't always the case. So you would specify your hypervisor address where the VMs are running. In this case, it's localhost. So I'm just going to put in 127.0.0.1. It's going to ask me what user to use to log in, and that's Casso in my case. It's going to set up the SSH for me. Okay, so you can see that it says it has found 3 VMs. And these are the standalone setup that I have created ahead of time. Note that it has discovered VSC1, and you can see that it figured out the bridges, the address, host name, gateway, etc., prefix length. It's now asking me to identify the type of VM that this is. This generally can figure it out on its own. So you can see that the C here is default, meaning that it thinks this is a VSC and it's correct. So I'm just going to take the default. Hit enter. It doesn't know, there's certain fields that it doesn't know how to detect, such as the system IP for routing. I'll add this, and then that's fine. Okay, you can see that it wrote VSC's deployment file for me, and that's great because that is a fully formed deployment file for my VSC. So it has discovered the VSD, and it has identified it as a VSD, taking the D as a default. So I'll allow it to use that. It's asking what type of VM this is, if it's primary or if it's a standby. In this case, it's a standalone, so I'll just take the primary. And it wrote out my VSD deployment file. And then finally, for Elasticsearch, it was able to discover that in all its IP addresses. Also determined it was Elasticsearch, so I'll take the default for that. At this point, I can discover more components from another hypervisor. So if your VMs are distributed to multiple hypervisors, you could just keep going with this for each hypervisor. In my case, I have no further hypervisors, so I'm just going to say no. Okay, so this is going to go through the normal rest of the wizard, but I'm going to skip a few steps. We're going to skip. So you could actually just quit the wizard at this point, and you would have everything, all the files that were discovered would be in place. However, if you want to make a change, or if you need to make a change, you can actually make it in the wizard, and the wizard already knows the information that was discovered. So to demonstrate this, we can see at the VSD step, and hit continue, and it knows it's a standalone, and notice that the S is default, and it already knows the host name, because it was discovered. I could change it, but I don't want to. So I'm just going to take all defaults here. It discovered the VM name, management address, prefix length, all of this stuff was discovered, and even the hypervisor, it remembers which hypervisor that it was running on. Okay, so I don't need to go through the rest of the steps because everything was auto-discovered, so I'm just going to quit. And then I can take a look at deployments wizard, which was created, and I can see the VSDs. And indeed, the VMs were discovered and the deployment files were created, and you can see the information is entered as a proper deployment file. So we should be all set for an upgrade or any other playbook that Metro provides. So that's all I have for the discovery demo. So I'd like to talk about a couple other new features of the of Metro version 4. So Metro version 4 now also supports VSD patch upgrade to version 6.0.5. Metro version 4 supports a download of container via tarball, and this is useful for users that have air-gapped labs or deployment systems where there is no internet access. So the container, the MetroAE container, can be downloaded via a tarball ahead of time and then installed without the need of internet access. And the last thing I'd like to talk about in our new features is that Metro version 4 now supports the installation of Zabbix health agents. So Zabbix is a tool, like an open source tool, that provides performance like CPU, memory usage, etc., monitoring on several of Linux-based devices, and these can be installed on any of the components, Nuage components that can support the Zabbix health agents. So that would be things like the VSD Elasticsearch, VNS utils, etc.
So I'm going to talk about the VSD features that have been added. These are some features that are specific to the VSD itself. One of them is we put in a couple of performance tests for clusters. And so what we've been told is that in the field sometimes customer environments and so on will be set up such that the disk and network performance for the VSDs is not adequate for a proper operation. So we've implemented some tests here that you can optionally run. By default, they're turned off, but you can turn them on. And the first one is a VSD disk performance test. And it basically measures the IOPS that each VSD is capable of to its own file system. Built into the VSD is the sysbench tool, and that's what we use to do the testing. And we provide knobs that allow you to configure the size of the test, the minimum threshold, and to turn on and off a couple of things related to the testing. It is set up such that if you enable it, it will run during the VSD deploy step. It will run right before the VSD install is done. And you can also run it standalone via a command, MetroAE VSD test disk. The second performance test we've added is for round trip time. And what that does is it measures the round trip time between the VSDs. There's one set that measures the install time, or I'm sorry, the round trip time within a cluster, and then another that runs between a primary cluster and a standby cluster in a geo-redundant deployment. We also have configurable thresholds and knobs to turn things on and off. It runs at just about the same time as the other one, just before the VSD install step, or you can run it standalone. And then as a convenience, we have created a command on the command line MetroAE VSD test performance that will run them both. And you can see down in the bottom right-hand corner, I have listed the knobs that you have, the controls that you have. So for both of the tests, you have one Boolean, true, false, that asks, should I run the test or not? And it's by default false, so it won't run. We also have the option that you can ignore errors, and that means if you set a threshold and the performance does not meet the threshold, we can either ignore the error if it's set to true, or declare an error if it's set to false. On the disk performance test, we have three knobs, additional knobs that you can control. One is the total file size, and that is, the way Sysbench works is it creates a whole bunch of files on disk and then writes and reads and writes to them. And by default, we set that at 100 gig, and you can change that to whatever size is appropriate for your deployment. We also have a minimum performance threshold. By default, that's 10,000 IOPS. You can set that to wherever you want. And we also have a total test time. So what Sysbench does is it runs for a particular period of time. The default is 5 minutes or 300 seconds, and you can change that as well. For round trip time, we have an intra-cluster, that is between the elements of a single cluster, that defaults to 20 milliseconds max. And then the max for intercluster, which would be between the primary and the standby, at 200 milliseconds. We also have a few more VSD-specific features. We learned recently that a lot of our customers want us to back up and restore their etc host file on the VSD during an upgrade. And so we added that as an option. So you can either do that or not. It's up to you. We also found that sometimes our customers' VSD file systems fill up, and they say, oh, it's time to upgrade, and they attempt to do the backup that takes place before the upgrade occurs, and they don't have enough disk space for it. So we went ahead and added a check to make sure that the VSD has enough space for the backups. And then this isn't really a feature, but it's a piece of documentation, and that is we found with a couple of customers that we have been able to use the stepwise playbooks in Metro, the operations, the lower level operations, to actually do a restore or a rollback to a previous version of the VSD. Now, it only works under certain conditions, but we've gone ahead and documented those conditions and the procedure for accomplishing it. And so just as a highlight here, you've got to have a valid backup. So let's say you're upgrading from 5.4.1 to 6.0.3, you decide you need to go back to 5.4.1, something goes wrong in the middle. You have to have a backup from that 5.4.1 image before you did the upgrade. Metro will create one for you if you're using Metro to do it, so that's already taken care of there. You also must have the binaries or the image files for the original version, so you have to have the 5.4.1 VSD QCOW2, for example. And then basically the way that it works is you run MetroAE VSD install pre-deploy. That will bring up the new VSD VMs. Then you copy the backup to the first VSD, which is a standard upgrade procedure. And then you do a MetroAE VSD install deploy, which will install the VSD software. VSD1 will discover that there's a backup. It will restore the database and all that. And then you do a VSD install post-deploy. So you can find more information about that in the repo and in the documentation. All right, handing off now for VSD features. VSC features, sorry.
Hi everyone, my name is Ishwar. I'm going to be doing the VSC features. So I'm going to be doing the VSC features, as I said. So the first feature that we have implemented for the VSC is we implemented the support for multiple underlays. So now previously we had defined only one control IP and one VLAN IP. With the new 4.0 support, we have a VPRN list that you can define. The format for the VPRN list is going to be the VLAN ID, the control IP, and the net mask for the IP address. So it takes in a list, so you can actually provide them as a comma separated list, and we'll actually create multiple VPRNs for that. Out of all these, the VLAN ID is the only one that's required. And the second feature that we have added is VSC Security hardening. What we are doing as part of the VSC Security hardening is we are disabling all the insecure SSH algorithms that are part of the code. We have added a playbook to actually run it after the fact that you have installed a whole VSP or VNS system. So the playbook that you can run is MetroAE VSC harden. That will actually go harden the VSC. If you're doing a install, if you're doing an install, it will actually automatically run. The way to configure it is by going into the vscs.yaml and enabling this parameter, enable hardening to true for all the VSCs that you want hardened. The last feature that we have supported for the VSC is the upgrade for the VSC pairs. So previously with MetroAE, if you have defined a bunch of VSCs, assuming we have 4 VSCs in your VSCs.yaml, we would upgrade them all at the same time. That means that we were never actually making sure that there was always a VSC that was running for the endpoints to connect to. With this new feature, we have actually defaulted the behavior to actually upgrade VSCs in a pair. What do I mean by upgrading in a pair? So when you have 4 VSCs defined, VSC1, VSC2, VSC3, VSC4, we assume that VSC1 and VSC2 are one pair, and VSC3 and VSC4 are one pair. So when we upgrade VSC1, VSC3 at once, and then upgrade VSC2 and VSC4 later. If you actually disable this feature by actually setting force VSC standalone upgrade to false in the upgrade.yaml, we're going to go back to the old way of doing it, where all the VSCs will be upgraded at one time. So that's all I have for the VSCs. I'm going to hand it over to Sanket to do the other components at this point.
This is Sanket. I'll share my screen. Okay. So I'll explain about the other component support that we have added to Metro. For the NUH, we have added support of adding three interfaces. One management interface is the mandatory one. We have optionally support for adding internal interface as well as one external interface. This is the way that you can do it. In the NUH file, you can add the management and the internal interfaces as follows, and also add a link to an external interface. And in a separate external interfaces file, you can specify this information here, the IP addresses, and this particular configuration will create 3 interfaces for NUH. Also for the Elasticsearch, we've added the capability to instantiate a standby Elasticsearch cluster if you already have a primary cluster running. So that will go ahead and instantiate another backup vstat cluster. And these are the commands that you can run to achieve that. We've also supported multi-uplink support for NSGVs. So this is an example of a multiple port NSG where I have specified port 1 and port 3 access in the NSGs to act as uplink ports. And in a separate YAML file called NSG access ports, I have specified these four ports, and out of these I'm using port 1 and port 3 for this particular NSG, and I'm using port 2 and port 4 for some other NSG. And how to find out more about Metro, we have this is the link for the GitHub repo. If you want to have the access for the repo and you don't already have access, then you can request access by clicking at the following site. To get the MetroAE 4.0 clone, the new MetroAE script, you can go to this URL and download the new 4.0 MetroAE there. And if there are any questions, then you can email us at this website, and here's a link to all the YouTube videos that we have so far. We have created a playlist out of it.